Hey everyone, Kane from Vivichim here, and today we're going to be discussing the Marvel's Avengers beta that I experienced over the weekend. It was free to play for everyone on all platforms. We played on PC because it's the best platform that I own to play it on, and I have some thoughts on the matter. The first thing I'd like to discuss is the characters in Marvel's Avengers, as this is probably one of the major talking points. I want to discuss how they play and who's in this game and what I think of them in general. And I remember when the game was first revealed that I think Square Enix 2018, it might have even been 2019, it was their E3 event. A lot of people really didn't like the way these characters look because they're different from the MCU, and a lot of people thought it would be tied into the MCU, I think, which is definitely not the case. These are their own characters, so if you somehow still believe that it was in any way tied, it's not, only in name. But you can tell that the MCU has had a major influence on this game just from the designs alone. They all kind of feel like their MCU counterparts more than a comic-inspired counterpart for the most part. The best way I thought about it when I was trying to think of what to say in this video earlier, and the best that I could come up with is like when you go to a foreign country, right, and you buy like toys as a kid, and you get these, like, instead of Captain America, you get Admiral USA, or instead of Iron Man, you get Steel Boy. You know what I mean? They're like the knockoff brand of the MCU Avengers. They're trying to imitate them, but they're not quite them. And that's not to say they're bad by any means. They're not. The performance and cast is great. It's just, you can tell that they're trying to invoke the feeling of the movies with these designs, and it just doesn't quite work. There's something uncanny and off about them, especially with Bruce Banner, who you see a lot in this beta. You do see quite a bit of him, but there's something about him and Black Widow that you can tell, and there's like, you've clearly taken influence from the movies in particular. And I think with Bruce Banner, he's literally in an outfit that he wears in one of the films, like just exactly the same, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, you can tell that's what they're aiming for, and it has this really weird, like, feeling when you're playing it. And it was like, well, I know this character, and it's like, I can tell what they're trying to do with this character because I like these movies, and the movies are super successful, so I don't blame them for doing it. It just feels weird. You know what I mean? I feel like instead of committing fully to this is linked to the movies, or no, this is completely different, they've tried to do both, and they've been successful at neither. And I think that's the major sticking point with these designs and the way characters are portrayed as well. You can especially in the performances, you feel this a lot. They're trying to emulate that movie style of these characters. Doesn't quite work because it's someone else trying to be someone's performance, and that's a weird way of putting it, because I'm sure in the full game we get to be exposed to the more nuanced performances that all of these fantastic voice actors are putting in, but just from what we're seeing now in this small snippet, you get the vibe that they're just trying to be the popular movie thing to appeal to a wider audience, and it comes across like that, not genuine, I suppose. Bruce Banner is the prime example, in my opinion. He just feels like he's trying to be Mark Ruffalo the entire time, and he's not. There is some differences to it, and like just the way he speaks is slightly different here and there. It just feels like they're trying to do that, and that's the best way to describe it. The other one is Tony Stark, voiced by Nolan North in this game, I believe. Tony Stark he's a bit much. That's the best way I can describe it. He's super quippy, he's cracking wise the entire time, you know, he's never misses a beat or an opportunity for a joke, you know what I mean? He's very much Robert Downey Jr., Tony Stark, but the issue is he's voiced by Nolan North, so instead of having that delivery and style of delivery that Robert Downey Jr. does to really like just get a jab in there really quickly and make it work, it comes across as quite overbearing when Nolan North is doing it. Again, that's nothing to slight Nolan North, he's an incredible voice actor, like genuinely. It's just amusing to see this take on the character that's clearly trying to be Robert Downey Jr., but you've also got him trying to be his own thing, not to just be compared to Robert Downey. It's so strange. I wish I could describe it better, but it's one of those things where I was playing it and the entire time, like, Iron Man was kind of getting on my nerves because he was like throwing all these like little jabs and like, hey, it's me, you know, like he has like a unibeam or something that comes out of his chest. I think that's what it's called. It's one of his abilities. Every time he'll be like, don't look at the beam, kids, and it's just, he was a bit much. Thor it's just Thor. The voice was very strange after hearing Chris Hemsworth for so many years, but I think that was a fine performance. Same with Captain America, where it was like, you're not Chris Evans and you're not trying to be Chris Evans in your like performance, so that's kind of good. Black Widow was also one of those weird ones where it was like, I can tell you're not trying to be Scarlett Johansson, but because the character is clearly designed to sort of look like Scarlett Johansson if you squint a little, it was a bit jarring. And that's nothing against that. I believe it's Laura Bailey who voices her. But you also have Miss Marvel as well, who was probably the best character in this game simply because there's no ties there and there's nothing to compare it to, and there's no burned and ingrained image of these characters in your mind. They felt the most natural, and I think it was good that they kind of centered the story that I experienced around that character specifically, because that was the easiest one to kind of go into the story as. If they tried to make you be Iron Man the entire time, I don't think it would work as well, because you'd have that constant feeling of, well, this is kind of weird in your head. I feel like having Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel, be the focus really removed all of that, because it's a character that not many people are probably going to be that familiar with playing this game, myself included. As for the ways the characters played, I've seen a lot of back and forth on this when I've been looking at opinions online, and honestly, I'm on the camp that I think they play really well for the most part. Some of them are better than others, which we'll get into. I've seen complaints that they all feel the same, which I don't think that could be further from the truth. They do not feel the same, other than you control them the same way, I guess. They all control the same way. But I feel like that's kind of necessary, because if they controlled too differently from each other at a basic level, then it would be kind of difficult to play them all, because that's a lot of stuff to remember, especially as all the new cast members are introduced. But yeah, no, they all had their own like unique little flares compared to the superhero antics. For example, you start off the beta by playing as Thor. You should see some footage throughout all of this, by the way. And Thor reminded me a bit of like God of War 4's Kratos, where he's throwing the hammer, and like Kratos throws his axe, he can bring it back to him, a very Thor thing to do. Thor was probably the most clunky of the combatants in the game that I got to play as. He was quite a clunky character, but they made up for that with each hit feeling like it had weight behind it, which is always a thing that I enjoy in games like this, simply because it's hard to get weight right in melee combat. It felt like you were hitting them with this godly hammer instead of just a stick, you know what I mean? And that was nice. It had some decent weight to it, and I really appreciated that. After the fact, we then moved on to the Hulk, I believe. I think it was straight into the Hulk, although it might have actually been Tony Stark, but either way, I'll go on to the Hulk next. It's very hard to mess up the Hulk, and this game didn't. The Hulk's a very simple character to get. You hit things hard, you smash things up, there you go, you've got Hulk in this game. Well done. They got his unique move in there, they got like the thunderclap and something. This is fine, you know what I mean? It's like, yeah, you've just got the Hulk in this game, he feels fine, he plays fine, he's bouncing around, he's bounding around, he feels larger than life. It's really cool. Before we get onto Iron Man, we got a brief hint of Captain America. Captain America, I feel like, was one of the weaker characters. We only got to play him very briefly in the opening sequence of this. I'll go into why a little bit later on. Captain America was a really weird one because he was basically based entirely around the shield. Which makes sense, it's Captain America. He kind of didn't feel fun to play outside of the shield. I found myself in that brief little segment, I was just throwing my shield at everything, simply because the actual hand-to-hand melee combat that he was doing felt really boring. It didn't feel like he was doing much damage at all. It felt really weak and kind of just like, I don't really want to be doing this, it doesn't feel fun, it doesn't feel empowering, it doesn't give you that power trip that you really want when playing a superhero game, it's not something like an Arkham, for example, or a Spider-Man. And granted, well, I guess Arkham would be the best example, because in Arkham you're Batman, who doesn't have superpowers per se, he's just like a dude in peak physical condition, and whilst Steve Rogers is a super soldier. I feel like I have more power in a Batman game where I'm just a rich bloke than I did as Steve Rogers at any point in this game, and I feel like that shouldn't be the case. Like, even Black Widow, who is literally just a person, I feel like Black Widow, who is my favorite character in this game to play as, I feel like she had more weight behind her hits than Steve Rogers ever did, and I don't know why that was, but yeah, Captain America was a simple matter of throw your shield at everything, do ultimate frisbee. He's the ultimate frisbee player. It was great. That was really fun. But yeah, Black Widow, my favorite character in this entire game, hands down. I don't think it's a competition. I think she's the best. She feels the most like an Arkham combatant, just by the pace of which she moves and fights. It's definitely not that style at all, but that's the one that gave me the most feel for that kind of combat that I really like in a superhero game. It's very fast action, up in your face, a lot of quick hits and combos and stuff like that. I really appreciated that. And also she had guns. Like, she has guns. That was really cool. You know, it's really funny. Like, I was playing as all these superheroes, and then I go to Black Widow. First thing I do is I pull out a gun and shoot someone. I thought that was hilarious. Then we had Miss Marvel as well, who is kind of similar to Black Widow in some ways. They both have a very similar climbing mechanic where they like grapple up to something. Black Widow has a grapple gun Batman style, and Miss Marvel uses her stretchy limbs to get to places, and they also can swing off stuff as well, which was something I found quite interesting, because we also have Spider-Man coming to the PS4 version of the game, and I feel like Spider-Man is going to play very similar to these characters, but instead of your gun or a stretchy arm, you're going to have your web shooter. I feel like that's what Spider-Man's going to be, is just going to be one of these characters, and I do think it's probably not going to be very good, because the swinging in this game isn't fun at all. Swinging from your lamppost, sorry if you can hear a dog by the way, but you're swinging from like the lampposts and stuff as Black Widow or Miss Marvel. Yeah, it's really clunky, it's really slow. It bugged out entirely on me on one point. I hope I got footage of that. Hopefully it didn't crash and delete all my data. Yeah, it was it's not fun, and I feel like that's gonna really hinder the Spider-Man character, and didn't make me hopeful to buy this on PS4 at all, because I don't feel like I'm gonna miss anything playing that Spider-Man character, because I think it's gonna be very similar to these two that are already in the base game. And the final one I want to talk about in terms of the way they play is Iron Man, who I think is by far the worst character in this game in terms of just how you play them. And I've already talked about how the performance comes across as a bit obnoxious sometimes, but I hate playing as Iron Man. I think he's the worst character to play as. I think when he's on the ground doing fist to fist, like melee combat CQC, I think he's great. The animations for all of these characters, but especially Iron Man's, really cool when you're punching them and then you can turn around and do like a repulsor blast. It all looks sick. It's all very fluid. It all looks really cool. Then you take Iron Man to the air though, and it's really terrible. The flying, because you can actually go into a hover mode and a flying mode. They're both separate. Hover mode is really slow, and it's actually faster just to move on the ground, I found. Yeah, it's really slow, and it's only really good for just getting up to people with jetpacks. The flying mode, meanwhile, is something you got to try really early on, and I know I got some footage of it. It's really clunky. It doesn't work well. You move way too fast. It's impossible to aim with it. Yeah, it's just really bad, and I feel like if you've got a flying superhero like Iron Man, and the flying controls are miserable, that doesn't bode well for any other flying superheroes you're going to bring in at a later date, in my opinion. I feel like it's a bad sign for things to come, and that it was really disappointing to have arguably the flagship hero of the MCU, and the reason a lot of people are going to buy this game. You know, he's one of the more popular ones right now, aside from maybe Spider-Man. Yeah, it was real disappointing to have the main thing about Iron Man that makes him stand out amongst the rest be the worst part of his character, and that was a big shame, honestly. And that was only really the start of me going, this isn't going to be as great as I thought. The next thing I want to talk about is the story of the game. So if you do not want spoilers at all, I do recommend that you just skip ahead, use the chapters or the time on screen. Skip ahead to the next part of the video, I'm sure it'll be fine. But yeah, the story is based around something called A-Day, Avengers Day, where it's the founding members of the Avengers, Captain America, Iron Man, Thor, Black Widow, and Hulk. They're celebrating the unveiling of the second headquarters in San Francisco, including the reveal of their own helicarrier, the Chimera, powered by a Terrigen crystal. The ceremony soon goes awry. This is the synopsis from Wikipedia, by the way. A terrorist attack by Taskmaster results in the Golden Gate Bridge and most of the city being destroyed, and Captain America's apparent death. I'm assuming he isn't dead, just because he's in a lot of the marketing material. But yeah, apparently Captain America's dead, hence why I didn't want to talk about it too much earlier. The crystal gets destroyed and Terrigen Mist is spread everywhere, which gives a lot of people superpowers. They become Inhumans, including Miss Marvel, and the Avengers disband after being blamed for this tragedy. Then the actual story takes place 5 years later. It's rebuilt. It's now under the organization AIM, and superheroes are basically being outlawed and targeted, and there's an interesting subplot in this one at some point where Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel, and Bruce Banner go into an AIM security, like a laboratory thing, and they're experimenting with curing Inhumans and turning them back to normal people, but they're doing so via a means that really hurts them. It's this really cool moment where you have this character, and hopefully they flesh it out a bit more so we get to feel it a bit more, but there's this character, Kamala Khan, who is an Inhuman, and she's essentially like being like, well, is that worth it? You know, is going through that pain worth it to be human again? You know, not to have these powers or be like a freak. And you know, you also have Bruce Banner there who can kind of relate to that, being the Hulk and all that. So that was a really cool little moments there. I do love a good comic book story, and I do feel like this is going to be a great one, but I don't feel like that this is going to be a story that can overpower my bigger issue with the game, and that is the gameplay itself. And we've already talked about that characters play and how they play, and they all play decently well, apart from Iron Man. But it's the missions that really fall apart for this, and the missions in this game suck. They're really repetitive. I played this game for 3 hours on stream, and after about the 2 hour mark, I feel like I experienced everything this game had to offer, which is not a good sign when I feel like I've gotten all that I need out of a video game in its beta before it's even released. That's not a good sign. The missions that I played, they all felt super repetitive. The locations were different. There was a slight variation in enemies, but for the most part they were identical, so much so that I can barely tell the difference between the robot ones and the human ones. There's occasionally a big mech or a big crab thing, but aside from that, they're mostly just dudes with guns, or some of them can teleport or whatever. They're nothing really special. They're all really boring, and that's the best way to put it. You know, there's some where you have to kill a certain amount of specific enemies, which are really quick. There's others where you have to destroy like a reactor or something. I believe I played 2 of them which were identical like that. And there are other ones where you need to get Jarvis into a mainframe, and you need to play like a King of the Hill style zone capture to do it. And that's really it. That's the 3 types of missions that I got, and sometimes they would combine those into like a side story mission that was more narratively based, but for the most part they were identical to each other. And I feel like every single one of them in the beta, at least, they all felt the same, and I feel like there was not enough variation to really carry this game. And I think that's the big issue with something like this. Instead of a more controlled narrative experience, a game as a service, you're gonna have a lot of repetitive stuff, you know, like raids or whatever. It's going to be a lot of repetition, which is not necessarily a bad thing, I suppose, if you want to do things like grinding, but it is kind of a bad thing when you just kind of want to play a video game and just have an experience. It's not that great as a general experience to be like, oh yeah, I get to play as the Avengers, but I can only play them in these 5 repetitive circumstances with a story along in the background. And hopefully the actual release is a bit different, because we didn't get the actual story missions outside of the few that they let us play. So hopefully we get some more out of it, and I really do hope that is the case, simply because this beta did not make a good impression in that regards. Some of them were fun and structured in a way that was interesting, but for the most part they had the same story beats over and over again. And I feel like once you'd played one of each, you really just kind of knew, and it sucked out any catharsis, and you were just left kind of button bashing your way through. And the other thing I want to discuss is the combat, actually, because the way this game is structured, I feel like it's trying to be different from the Arkham games and the Spider-Man game, but also kind of bring in some of that at the same time. There is a lot happening in these games at one time. There's explosions and things going on everywhere on screen. It's very hard to concentrate on this game when you're playing as a character. You're kind of just button bashing your way through, and there are combos that you can do and stuff like that, but you're mostly just button bashing your way through waves of spongy enemies, you know, like the Hulk takes more than one punch to knock out a dude. Yeah, I get it, you know, you don't want to make it too easy, you know, you want to balance it a bit more, but you're just mashing your way through something, occasionally, you know, using an ability. That's about it. It's pretty hollow in that standpoint, and it was kind of a shame. And whilst I didn't necessarily think it was bad by any means, it just lacked some of the... It lacked the satisfaction that I feel like Spider-Man and Arkham has, and even other games that I feel like it was more closely resembling to in its combat style. It lacked the sense of satisfaction that you got out of playing them, because it didn't feel like it had much going for it, you know. And one of the bigger issues I had with it is that it actually has like a block/parry system in it, which is fine. I just don't think they've implemented it well at all, because the modifiers, or like the notifiers of an attack incoming, are on the enemy, and the parryable ones are not really colors that I found stood out much amongst the background. And it's fine to have them on the enemies. Like Ghost of Tsushima does it excellently. They have them on the enemies, the parryable ones. But the difference between that game and this game, and maybe it's because I'm so used to superhero games such as Arkham and Spider-Man, which I've mentioned multiple times, the difference with Ghost of Tsushima, it's a game where the combat is orientated so you're always focused on your opponent and not you. And that might sound strange, but the way that game is structured, it's similar to like a Souls game, where you're more focused on what the enemy is doing than what you're doing, because you want to dodge out of the way, roll out of the way, parry, attack at certain times. That's the whole idea of it. You know, you want to do things in a certain manner, so you're watching the enemy and seeing when you can do that. The problem with this is that there's so much going on that you can't really focus on the enemy, because there's just noise on screen and flashing lights and explosions. You never really have time to focus entirely on that enemy, so you kind of miss the dodge and parry things a lot. You kind of got used to it after a while, I did at least, but for a long time I was just getting hit by stuff because I couldn't focus on what the enemies were doing, and it was partially because I was focusing on what I was doing. And maybe that's because in the Arkham and Spider-Man game, you're never really focused on what the enemy's doing, you're always focused on what you're doing, because it's all centered around you. The dodge symbols are above your head, the bullets and the things coming in are always around you, you know what I mean? It's centered around the superhero in the middle, and then you can like hyper focus on that and really get into the flow of it, whereas something like Ghost of Tsushima allows you to focus on an enemy, because whilst there may be a lot of them at one time, it's a very basic playing field of here are some enemies, you can quickly glance to see what they're doing, and there are ranged enemies who give you audio cues. In this, they don't give you audio cues, they give you visual cues, and because you're so hyper-focused on yourself, because there's so much noise around you, you're gonna get shot quite often and frozen quite often, simply because, well, you can't see any of it, because there's too much to take in. I do feel a simple little thing of here's time to dodge, the dodge thing is on you instead, I think that would change it completely. For my taste anyway, it would make it a lot more satisfying and gratifying to play as a superhero, as opposed to what you're doing in this game. It's where you're punching a dude and then occasionally you're just getting shot up like you're just some common bloke, because you can't see what's going on, because every time you look away from the center of the screen for a fraction of a second, there's a million explosions and pink goo flying everywhere. It's crazy. Yeah, I feel like that best sums up this game, to be honest, where it's like, it's not necessarily bad, it's just, it could be a lot better, and I feel like this beta did the opposite of what it intended to do for me personally, where it was like, I went into this with low expectations of this game, and it surpassed them. It really did. It did surpass them. The problem with it was that it didn't surpass them enough for me to be convinced that this is a game that I need to play. And I feel like, outside of the fact that I'm a content creator and a game critic who could potentially get some good views, I guess, or decent content surrounding this game and the discussion about it, I feel like as a consumer as well, this is something that I could entirely miss. Within 2 hours, I feel like I got everything that I needed, and I was like, cool, I got a free experience, I got whatever I needed to know out of it. The story was decent, but I don't think it's worth going through the same mission 70 times. I'm like, alright, I'll probably give this one a miss. Whether I actually will or not is yet to be decided. I might pick it up just so I can do a full review of the game when it comes out in a How Bad Could It Be format. But as of right now, yeah, I'm not convinced that this is going to be anything special. I think it's going to be the most average game of 2020, and that's the best way I can put it. That's the most praise I can get it. Yeah, it's going to be average, you know? It's not going to be great. It might be good, but it's probably just going to be, yeah, this is a game that exists, and I feel like it's going to die out pretty quickly. I don't know. Maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe the Avengers branding will carry it so far. But anyway, what did you guys think of Marvel's Avengers? Let me know down below in the comments. Subscribe for more Vivitchim content, all that good stuff. Yeah, I'd love to discuss this game further with you guys. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all soon.